tipping culture at all-inclusive resorts gotten completely out of control? Well, based on the comments on the tipping guidelines video that I did, there are definitely some major conflicting opinions on tipping at an all-inclusive resort. I wanted to do an updated video about tipping at an all-inclusive resort and address some of those comments that we got on our other video, because once you start talking about tipping, some people get really, really upset. Number one is something I realized after doing that video is that if you've never worked for tips, you are going to have a completely different opinion about tipping than someone like myself, who has not only worked for tips, but relied on tips to make a living. I worked in the restaurant industry for many, many years. But then in my professional career, I managed a group of employees who were in the service industry and the beauty industry that also relied on tips to really make a living. Number two is another thing I realized after that video is that tipping is not something that is in everyone's culture. So I do feel that it has gotten a little out of hand in the United States. I feel like everywhere you go now, people are asking for tips, even people that are making way above minimum wage. There are some countries who do not have a tipping culture at all. So when I start talking about tipping, I can totally understand why some people are not only confused, but they disagree with it, especially when we're talking about an all-inclusive resort. It leads me to the subject of, are gratuities included at an all-inclusive resort? With this subject as well, there's a lot of conflicting information and thoughts. So I know for sure places like Sandals and beaches, employees cannot accept tips. In fact, they would get fired if they accept tips. And that's why these resorts are more expensive. It truly is an all-inclusive. But every other place that I've been, I've never seen something where it says gratuities is included. And I know with packages, like if you go through a travel agent, something like that, sometimes it does say that. But even if it were to say that gratuities were included, I personally would still tip, even if it's just $1 here and there or a few dollars, for this reason. Because most resorts are still paying their hourly employees very low wages. I even went onto Indeed just to kind of verify what they're getting paid per month. And really on average, they get about 5,000 to 10,000 pesos per month, which is about 300 to 500 US dollars. The same is true in places like Punta Cana. So these employees really do rely on tips in order to make a living and feed their families. In quite a few of the comments, people were saying that it's not their fault that the hotels are not paying these employees more, and we totally agree. And I really don't see that changing anytime soon. And as I mentioned earlier, tipping is a personal choice. It is not required. This video is not telling you that you have to tip. I'm just sharing my perspective and my experiences. And I'm also going to share with you, once again, kind of the amounts that we give. But before we do that, I wanted to address some other comments. And one of those was that people like us who tip put pressure on those who don't tip, and that they also feel like they don't get as good a service as people who tip. I honestly can't give any perspective on that because I always tip. However, I will say that we always tip no matter what, and we've had both great service and horrible service. Another comment that I saw a lot was that they had saved every penny all year long to go on this vacation, and they did not have any extra money to spare for tips. And my thoughts on that is that it really doesn't take a lot of money to show your appreciation in countries like Mexico and Punta Cana, because the dollar is very strong. So even $1 goes a long way. So you could tip maybe $10, $15 a day and still show appreciation for these workers. And that's only an extra $100. One final thought about tipping, and just another perspective, is that whenever we travel to another country or culture, we always try to respect that country. And so if, for instance, if we're going to go someplace where tipping is not appropriate or it's not customary, then we're not going to tip. Versus Mexico, Punta Cana, Jamaica, those are all countries where tipping is part of the culture, just like in the United States. Just like we would like people to do when they are visiting our countries. And you're never going to get it perfect. You're new to the country. You're not going to know everything that is customary. But tipping is very easy to research and find out if it's customary in a certain country. Now, has tipping gotten out of control in the United States? Yes, I do feel like it has gotten a little bit out of control. But I'm not going to punish people in Mexico or Punta Cana or Jamaica because of that. Now, before we leave for our vacation, we'll go to the bank and we will get a lot of singles. Now, we budget between $20 to $50 per day for tips. And we do not convert our US dollars to pesos when we arrive to the country. You certainly can, but the US dollar, the Canadian dollar, is widely accepted. And we had another comment saying that it's actually better to convert into pesos because then the worker doesn't have to convert the dollars into pesos, and that might cost them some money. But every time I go, I ask the employees this, and they say either is fine. So a lot of people also ask how to carry the tips around because they're sitting at the pool and the beach and they don't want to leave them. And they also don't want to carry a bunch of cash around. Now, we have a little waterproof case that we put our phone in. We can also put the money in. And that way, if we do have to walk back and forth somewhere, we can just grab it and take it with us. Honestly, we just keep it in our beach bag. And even if we take a dip in the pool or the beach and no one is there to watch it, we're in close enough proximity to keep our eyes on it. We've never had an issue. Also, do not carry a large amount of cash with us. So, for instance, if we know we're going to spend the day at the pool or the beach, then we're going to bring the amount of singles we need just for that time. Even better way to do it is if you know you're going to be at one spot all day long. So for instance, if you're just going to hang out at the pool and you're going to have the same server bringing you drinks, and you can tip them up front a $10 or $20 bill and say, hey, we're going to be here all day long, so here's your tip up front. And then that way you don't even have to worry about it for the day. Quickly, let's get into some actual tipping amounts. And remember, this is just suggestions. This is just what we do. And I would also love to hear from you in the comments some of your suggestions. First, before we even get to the resort, let's talk about the transportation to the resort. And typically, we tip 20% of whatever the ride is. So if the ride is $50, we will give the driver $10. Then once you arrive, we also tip the person that brings our luggage to the room, usually $3 to $5 minimum. So tipping the housekeeping staff was a huge subject of conversation in the comment section from my last video. And I actually got so many great ideas from you guys. So typically in the past, we would tip the housekeeping staff up front. I would try to find the person and say, hey, we're going to be here for 3 days, whatever it is. And usually I do about $5 per day. So many of you made such a great point saying that that person usually changes from day to day. So now I do tip daily around $5 a day. And I try to find the person and give it to them directly because this person is usually the least appreciated. And they definitely have one of the hardest jobs, I think, at the resort. Some of you even suggested writing a handwritten note and leaving it with the tip, which I love that idea as well. But the housekeeping staff is often forgotten. So please do not forget to tip the housekeeping staff, even whatever you can, even if it's just a few dollars a day, they will appreciate it. Now, usually for the bartenders, we tip around $1 to $2 per round, but this can add up pretty quickly, especially in an all-inclusive resort. So that's why I suggested just paying them up front if you know you're going to be with the same bartender during the day. Now, once you get to the restaurants, I think it really depends. Per meal, it can be anywhere from $2 to $10. So for instance, if we are going to be at the buffet, then we'll tip maybe $2 or $3 for the waiter. But if we're going to get service, and depending on the type of service, then we'll leave $5 to $10. Is it annoying sometimes to have to carry around cash? Yes, sometimes it is, especially since you're at an all-inclusive resort. But for me, the payoff of just seeing the joy on the workers' faces and the appreciation when you give them the tips is worth it. Some other staff members you do not want to forget is, of course, if you get any type of spa treatments, you want to factor in tips for them. And if you have butler service, and I did do an entire video on how much you should tip your butler. And please add any of your tips on tipping in the comment section below. And if you are new to our channel, 3 Days and Tres Noches, we bring you honest travel reviews, information, and tips about the destinations that we go to. So we're not a travel vlog or a travel agency. And we just show you that you can have an amazing vacation in a really short amount of time. So we would love for you to subscribe and keep following us. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok, and we stay connected to our subscribers through our Facebook group.